So, does anyone here love sweet corn? Anyone? A number of people love sweet corn. I love sweet corn too. And if you love sweet corn, you might know this fact about it, that sweet corn is especially good if it's cooked and eaten right after it's picked. Because as soon as you pick a cob of corn off the stalk, the sugars in that corn begin to convert to starches, and it changes the texture, it becomes less sweet. And in fact, like most varieties of sweet corn lose half their sugar, they turn into starch within the first 24 hours. So if you can get some fresh corn out of the garden, it's going to be sweeter than if you get it at the store and spend there a few days. So I read that some people who are really serious about their sweet corn will go start a pot of boiling water on the stove and then go out to the garden and pick their sweet corn. So it's going to be as sweet as it can possibly get. I've never tried that, but it sounds like a really good idea. And we've got a garden at our house. It's kind of hidden around the corner from our garage. And so I cannot wait to harvest some sweet corn from our garden. Maybe you can come join us for that. A little salt, pepper, and butter, and that'll be good. We even have those little holders that you stick in the end so you don't get your fingers all messy. And we've got these little dishes that you can sit the cob on, and it'll be great. There may be one little problem to that, to come share in some fresh from the garden, super sweet corn. And that problem is that nobody planted corn in our garden this year. But, it's no big deal. It's the season for corn to be ripe. So we just get some water going on the stove, and we'll go out to the garden and pick some corn from the watermelon vines. I brought one just to demonstrate. Here we got some corn on a watermelon vine. Now, obviously, I rigged this up. You can see the little twisty tie there. But if I actually expected to get corn from a watermelon vine, you would think I was crazy. Literally, you would think I was crazy. Last week, we started a series called Fruit Stands. And it's a series about fruit and buildings, which sounds really random until we see that the Bible uses all kinds of stories about farming and all kinds of stories about buildings to describe how we can grow in God. And so tonight we're going to focus on one of the fruit illustrations. So if I honestly thought I could get sweet corn from a watermelon vine, you would think I was crazy. When talking about physical plants, that's something that's completely obvious. So why is the same principle not so obvious when it comes to the way we live our lives? When I was a sophomore in college, there was a guy who lived down the hall from me who did nothing but play on his computer. He probably ate and used the bathroom at some point, but he did nothing else but play on his computer. He didn't go to class, he didn't socialize with anybody else. I probably wouldn't have even known he lived on my hall, except his roommates would prop the doors open sometimes and you could see him there at the computer. And this mysterious hallmate didn't come back for the winter semester, but because he got less than a 1.0 GPA for the fall semester. And at that time, the average freshman took four credit classes. And I heard from roommates or something that this guy got either a C or a D in a programming class, because that had something to do with his computer. And he failed, completely failed everything else. So that would have given him either a 0.125 or a 0.06 GPA for that fall semester. But what did he expect the outcome to be? He never went to class and he never did his homework. Does that ever happen to you? Hopefully not the failing out of school part. But maybe some of us were surprised about a particular test that we bought. even though we didn't study for it. Maybe we go up for fourths or fifths every time we go to the marketplace, and we can't believe we put on the freshman 15 during the first week of class. Hopefully not. I actually have a friend who put on 11 pounds over a 5-day cruise, so be careful. On a more serious note, maybe we've got a ton of surfacey friends, but we don't understand why we have no truly deep friendships, even though we never open up about what's really going on, even when someone asks us. And maybe at times we don't know why we feel spiritually dry, even though we haven't been investing any effort in knowing God better or serving Him. See, it's not like we're really surprised when those things happen, but kind of, simply because we didn't think through it. But when we experience situations like that, it's kind of like expecting corn to grow on your watermelon vine. So, here we are at the beginning of a brand new school year. And what if we thought through where we wanted to be by the end of the school year? Set a path toward that. And then we won't keep getting surprised, kind of, by the consequences of our actions. And we can set physical goals, we can set academic and career goals, and those are definitely good things. But what about where we want to end up spiritually? For whatever reason, that tends to be the last thing to show up on our radar. Yet the investment that we make or that we don't make in spiritual things will affect the outcome of our lives much more than those other areas, than physical or academic or career. I mean, think about it. Our physical choices will affect how we look and how we feel. Our academic and our career choices will affect what we do. But more so than all our other choices, our spiritual choices affect who we'll become. More so than all our other choices, our spiritual choices will affect who we'll become. So here at the front end of the semester, is there any way we can take ownership of that and get to where we want to go, to become who we want to be, or better yet, become who God designed us to be by partnering with Him and starting to become that. So the Bible gives us some straightforward direction about this in a farming illustration. So I encourage you to open up in your Bible to Galatians 6. You can use a Bible app. You can use the Bible you brought. You can grab a Bible from the center aisle. If you don't have your own Bible, you can keep a Bible from the center aisle. Take it home with you. Write in it, highlight it, whatever you want to do. And we're looking at Galatians 6. And it's okay if you need to check the table of contents or ask your neighbor where that's at. It's totally cool. So, Galatians 6, verses 7 through 9. I'm going to read it in the ESV. It says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." So this passage is kind of turned into a cliche, but the principle is so true. We reap what we sow. We reap what we sow. And unfortunately, we often hear that phrase in a negative context. You reap what you sow. Well, you got what you deserved. Or, told you so. It's kind of a self-righteous feel sometimes when people talk about that. I found that it's way more effective to give someone a challenge or a direction for where they're going rather than beat them up about where they've been. I appreciate that in my own life when I've got an adjustment or some correction to be made with things in a specific area. So the idea I want to lodge in your head tonight is this, the question. Am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to harvest someday? Am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to harvest someday? Some of you saw that I posted that line along with a verse image a couple weeks ago. I just was reading through Galatians 6 in my personal time with God, just in my reading plan, and God just threw that question into my head of, this would be a really good object lesson at the beginning of the semester. But God has been setting up this illustration since day 3 of creation. It's a long time to be planning something, but it's true. In Genesis 1, verses 11 through 13, it says that on day 3 of creation week, God created plants that bear fruit with seeds according to their kind. So, therefore, a corn kernel will produce corn. A watermelon seed will yield watermelon. An apple seed will eventually produce apples. If the conditions are right for growth, it'll happen every time. So you'll never plant an apple tree and get oranges from it. You'll never plant watermelon and get corn, even if you want it really badly. It's just not going to happen. And so that's why the passage in Galatians 6 is such a clear illustration for us. Am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to harvest someday? Again, that's taking that very obvious physical illustration and getting us to think about it spiritually. That's the point there. So let's take a closer look into our theme passage. We're going to kind of go verse by verse, starting at verse 7, Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. So it might be helpful to have the context of this a little bit, and that's provided in the first 6 verses of the chapter. And you're welcome to look through that if you've got it pulled up. I'm just going to kind of summarize those verse by verse. At first, it seems like a random assortment of instructions. So verse 1 is talking about correcting fellow believers, but doing so with gentleness. Verse 2 is talking about helping one another when we feel burdened. Verse 3 is talking about being humble, showing humility. Verses 4 and 5 are talking about comparing ourselves to where God wants us to be so we can know if we're on track, and not comparing ourselves to other people. And then verse 6 is talking about giving generously to support your spiritual teachers. And I really like that one for some reason. It's a really good one. You should file that away, and when you graduate and have a full-time job someday, you can remember your campus minister with that. Just saying. So it kind of seems like this random assortment of instructions. And then it goes into, God is not mocked, you reap what you sow. So it's kind of strange, isn't it? God is not mocked. Why would it say anything about God being mocked? I think that's because when we don't look ahead and actually think through life, we can sometimes think that we're pulling a fast one on the people around us and even on God. If I'm always correcting people, but not doing so with the spirit of gentleness, I'm giving the impression that I think I'm awesome and everyone else isn't. If I'm not helping out my friends when they're under a heavy burden, it's kind of like, oh, that's too bad. It sucks to be you. If I put on the show that I'm so amazing and I know the truth is far from that, kind of obvious. If I'm comparing myself to other people instead of what God's calling me to do, well, God, I'm not nearly as bad as that person over there. We're lifting ourselves up. If I take from the church and never give anything back, I'll start thinking, boy, this is great. Church must be all about me instead of being about God. So if any of those things connect with us, if any of those things apply to us, we're tempted to think we're pulling something over on the people around us, and maybe including God. But God is not mocked. He's not fooled. He knows exactly what's really going on. And when the season is right, we'll get a harvest of what we actually planted, not what we wished we would have planted. when the season's right, we'll get a harvest of what we actually planted, not what we wished we would have planted. But like I said, it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about where we're going from here. And even if I've been planting fake seeds, even if I've been planting purely ornamental seeds that are only for show, whether that's been the past week or the past 3 months or all my life, I can start now planting the right seeds. I can think through, where should I be? Where does God want me to get to with his help? And I can start planting those right seeds going towards that harvest and that fruit. So am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to be harvesting someday? So let's look at the next verse, Galatians 6:8. It says, For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. What does it mean to sow to the flesh, and what does it mean to sow to the Spirit? Well, the previous chapter, Galatians 5, kind of lays it out really specifically for us. We got that on the screen, Galatians 5, verses 19 through 23. It says, Now the works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality, and by definition, that is consensual sex between two people who aren't married to each other. So sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. So, which outcome do you want in your life? Which fruit do you want to be yielded in your life? I see my high school classmates on Facebook. I'm amazed that there's a few of them that are still single. They are always posting photos in different bars, and every picture they're posing with a different person. And when you're middle-aged someday, it's a long ways off. But, I mean, that's far ways off. But when you're middle-aged someday, do you want a solid family? Or do you want a broken family? Do you want to still be pursuing that party lifestyle like some of my high school classmates? Do you picture yourself closer to God or further from him? It comes back to our question for tonight. Am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to harvest someday? Okay, middle age is way far off for you guys, like twice your, maybe a little more than twice your age. And so how about the end of the semester? You guys can think through the end of the semester, right? By the end of the semester, do I want to be closer to God or further from him? So am I planting the kind of fruit I hope to harvest someday? Thinking about just in the span of this semester, this season. So let's finish out our passage. God gives us some really good wisdom and insight for us here. Galatians 6:9 says, Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. We live in the age of Snapchat, right? I won't name any names, but a couple of us, just like a week and a half ago, said something like this. It's hard for me to commit to the time investment of a texting conversation, but I'll snap you all day. And it's just kind of a testament of our instant, we want instant everything. And, but with all our technology, with all our rush of culture, farming is still something that's not instant. Farming is still something that's never going to be instant. James 5:7 says this, "See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until he receives the early and late rains." So the farmer doesn't plant seeds and then just stare at the ground and wait for something to happen, right? It'd be kind of silly. And he doesn't come back to it the next day or even the next week and say, there's no results. It must not be working. Let's plow it under and plant weeds. That'd be ridiculous. A farmer's not going to do that. He's patient, waiting for the season of that fruit that he planted. So in Galatians 6:9, the Apostle Paul tells us not to grow weary in doing good. And he kind of already made an assumption here, that when we actually think through about where we want to go, that we're going to choose to do the good and godly things and plant those into our life. So he tells us when we're sowing goodness into our lives and the lives around us, don't give up if we don't see instant results. Don't give up if we don't see instant results. And if he felt it was important to say that to people from 2,000 years ago, it's super important for us to hear that today. It's not give up if we don't see instant results. And if we don't give up, if we keep planting goodness and godliness, in the right season there will be a harvest. In the right season there will be a harvest. Like some things, a radish is about like that, almost instant. Maybe it takes a couple weeks. Something like watermelon, it's going to take all growing season here in Michigan. Something like an apple, it's going to take a lot longer than that. So it depends on what fruit we're trying to develop at that point as how much patience we're going to have with it. So I've got one more illustration for us tonight. I'm going to show us some different kinds of apples. So here, does anyone know what this is? Good guess. It's not a crab apple though. See this? Touch that. So this is called a thorn apple. It's a hawthorn. It's got spikes on it this long that are really sharp and hurt if you run into them. But it makes this little apple fruit, and it's edible. Might not have the best texture or flavor to it, but it is edible, and it's got these spikes that are going to hurt. Now here's a couple versions of crab apple. There's some with kind of more purpley leaves and more green leaves, and fruit ranges from yellow, red, purple, anywhere in between. These are ornamental. They're really pretty, especially from the distance. But once you taste it, some people like them, but they're really bitter and really sour. And the variety you have, it might be a little more bitter, a little more sour, but they're basically for decoration. Now this is a wild apple. Whoops. So this, probably someone threw a core and it sprouted into a tree. It hasn't been cared for. The flavor might be okay, but the fruit's small. It might have worms in it. You could eat it. It might be all right, but it's not the best. And then we also have a cultivated apple that's going to taste good. It's bigger fruit. This is what an apple's supposed to look like. So if my friends looked at my recent life, which apple would they compare that to? Fruitful and good and yummy and big fruit, or kind of good but not really taken care of, or just for show, or ouch, this is going to hurt if I get too close to it. Which one are they going to make a connection with? And apples are a fruit that takes a really long time to produce, years before you get your first apples on the tree. So, when we get those years down the road, we don't want to have that kind of surprise of, oh, hey, that's not the fruit I hope to have at this point. So am I planting the fruit I hope to harvest someday? So if we apply this, we take a glance down the road that even just, this semester, or maybe this school year, maybe 20 plus years down the road, if we do this, we'll be harvesting good fruit at that time instead of harvesting regrets at that time. And imagine if we apply this, what that would do, like not necessarily 20 years down the road, but this school year, if we are applying this, what would that do to this community of His house? If we do it, how will it impact the whole campus community? If we're looking where we want to go and we're sowing the fruit to get there, it's worth the investment. Let me pray.